Comes to us from Northern California. And he also happens to have been to Iran, where I was born and raised at, way back in 1953, when the CIA, in a covert operation, brought down the government of Iran and had a coup d'etat, created a coup d'etat, which now it's open public record that that's what they did. At that time, this gentleman did not know all the illegal operations and criminality of the CIA, but now he's become very, very well aware of what's going on. In fact, he's become a source on all that. His website is www.ciadrugs.com. That's the easiest to remember name of this website I remembered. ciadrugs, .com. And then he has a couple others also that link to it. He was an investigator with the Federal Aviation Administration. His job, obviously was to provide for more safety on our airlines. And he found out criminality within the government that caused airline crashes, that cremated dozens and dozens of people, and he's done a lot. He's done a lot, taken it up to the higher-ups, to the courts, and he has a very incredible story to share, which I wanted to share with you personally as far as what he's accomplished. He's a true American hero. He's truly a living legend, folks. If we had more people like this man of integrity and honor and courage that is willing to put everything he has in his life, his personal fortune in life, on the line for freedom, folks, I know we could be free a lot quicker. And I hope, you have him as a role model for yourself. You consider him as one, because he is one for me. Please help me give a warm hand of welcome to Rodney Stich.
Wow, what a nice introduction. Thank you. Okay, the topic this period is going to be on government corruption that I and several dozen other government investigators discovered over a period of years. And intimately involved with all this is corruption in the judicial branch, which toward the end I'll go into to some extent. And with the information, the documented information we have on government corruption, I think a lot of good can be done with it if people will only use the material that we have accumulated. Let me go back a little bit. First, all of this is also tied in with September 11th. And September 11th is simply one more event in the aviation game that's been going on for many years, and which had as its breeding ground the corruption in the FAA. Now, let me give you a little information on my background so you know how I accumulated this information, where I come from. First, I was a Navy pilot and patrol plane commander in World War II. Actually, I was in the Navy a year before Pearl Harbor, so that kind of, I guess, makes me a little ancient there. But George Bush Sr. and I got our Navy wings at the same time. He got his in Corpus, I got mine in Pensacola. He went on to become a single-engine Navy pilot, and I went on to become a multi-engine patrol plane commander. After the war, I became a pilot. I flew domestically and internationally. I'm one of the first pilots licensed by Japan. My pilot license number is 170. And I also was one of the first pilots that flew for Japan Airlines. And all of my co-pilots were Japanese military pilots who used to shoot at us in the Pacific, so we had a few interesting moments there. Part of my experience was flying Muslim pilgrims to Mecca, and I think I might have been the only one pilot in the group that flew to the second holy city, which is Medina, and this is landing in the desert. And I flew out of most of the Middle East countries. I flew out of Jerusalem, Beirut, Tehran, Abadan, and I lived with the Arabs for a while, and I visited their Palestinian refugee camps. In those days, the Arabs were friends to us, but of course we had a few policies that offended them over a period of years. Now, I was also in Iran the morning that the CIA engineered revolution came about. That was in 1953, and this is when Mossadegh was being overthrown by the Shah. And of course, at that time, I was kind of naive, and I didn't realize the CIA was behind such activities. Well, I finally left airline flying and went to work for the Federal Aviation Administration, actually here in Los Angeles. And the function of an FAA inspector is to conduct flight checks of airline pilots, issue ratings for them to fly the equipment, check airline procedures, and look for safety problems and make reports which FAA management is expected to respond to. And some of the things we'd be looking for would be like hijacking problems, these have been going on for about 40 years, and one might give a little thought to why they've never been corrected until September 11th, and of course that's only been partially corrected. But while I was working in the Los Angeles office, there was one airline that was having a lot of crashes, and these crashes went on for 20 years. And matter of fact, there were more crashes there than all the other airlines combined. So the FAA, and it had just experienced one crash that was the world's worst at that time, and it occurred in the Brooklyn section of New York, and it was actually about 1 mile from where the September 11th events would occur some years later. And the same conditions, same corruption that caused the conditions to exist responsible for that earlier crash that I made reference to also played a role in the conditions that ensured the success of the terrorists. So this is important to realize this, because we have the same group in control and the same culture in control now for aviation safety as existed in the past and played a role in these tragedies. Well, one of the things I ran into, the FAA asked me to volunteer for this program, and I said, well, Rod, it's a very difficult assignment, which was pretty well known throughout the FAA, but we're right behind you. Well, the first part of that is correct. And so I got transferred to Denver, and I took over the air safety responsibilities at the grassroots level for the most senior program at the world's largest airline. At that time, it was good old United Airlines. And that assignment, unfortunately, changed my whole life. But anyhow, what I found, and what other inspectors had found, was that the airline, and this is there was a few key people at the airline, and a lot of key people in the FAA responsible for the misconduct that was going on. But what was going on, the training of the pilots and the flight engineers as required by law was not being done. The competency checks that are required every year, Grandma Moses could easily have passed those. And the records then were falsified to indicate that the aircraft, and in those days the training was done in the aircraft, and so that was somewhat expensive. But the records showed that falsely showed that these things had been done. So what happens when inspectors try to do something about it? Well, when we make reports, they're given back to us, and we're told, look, it makes us look bad when there's a crash. So rather than do something to prevent the crashes, they cover up and they just don't want the blame for where they share some of the blame. And if we continue to make reports, they're destroyed. And then what I would do is put one of my copies back in the records, and that really got them mad. So finally, we were having so many mishaps, and the mishaps were occurring every few months. We'd have a crash. And in those days, the aircraft were a little more troublesome. They're subject to more problems, and unless the pilots really understood the system, some of them did, but many of them did not, it would lead to tragedies. And of course, this is what was going on. So finally, well, let me give you an example of how people pay with their lives for this. There was a fatal crash in Salt Lake City where 43 people, men, women, and children, were cremated alive. And the cause of the crash was due to 3 problems, which we all knew, which I had repeatedly reported. One was the captain's high sink rate approach. And in the jets, that is very hazardous. And I remember this one pilot, I made an en route check with him from Chicago, Omaha to Denver, and I could see the problem, and I wrote a report that he needs corrective training. Well, now, another problem I found that was involved in Salt Lake City was the flight engineer program. I had written reports that it was the worst I had ever seen in my flying career, that the training program and the competency checks were a farce, and something should be done about it. And the last thing I reported was that the emergency evacuation training that was required to be done every year was only being done every 3 years, and the records were falsified. I remember once when I discovered this, I mentioned to the ground instructor, you know, this, where you're violating the regulations. And he said, well, listen, I do what I'm told, which, of course, I could understand the situation. But I reported these things, and either the reports are destroyed or you start becoming what they call a troublemaker. You're not on the team. Well, as the crashes continue, and when I say crashes, remember, we have men, women, and children being cremated alive, dismembered alive, so it's not a good way to go. And so the inspectors had several choices. We can either transfer out and look for an assignment that has less problems, or if you're smart, you'll be part of the team and everything looks rosy and you don't make the reports. But there's a few inspectors that felt they had an obligation, and so we fought the system. Now, one of the things I was doing, I brought these things up to the regional office, and that didn't help a bit. All you are doing is irritating the system. So finally I felt something has to be done. And I was a little creative here, and I became an independent prosecutor for about 4 months while I'm an FAA inspector. And that was kind of interesting. No, something like this has never happened in the FAA before, where we have an inspector charging management with criminal misconduct associated with several recent air disasters, one of which was the world's worst. And it's probably never again will be, because I think everybody pretty well saw what happened to that inspector. But anyhow, it was interesting. I was bringing in FAA management, and it was a regular courtroom proceeding. The judge was a member of the FAA hearing office FAA administrative staff. So he did a good job of covering up. But at any rate, I was able to get testimony in and additional documentation, one of which, it was kind of interesting how it came in my possession, but it really showed the corruption behind that earlier United Airlines crash. But anyhow, what happened, there was pretty much of a cover-up. Prior to this, incidentally, I was phoning the National Transportation Safety Board, and I was in contact with them. I was telling them the problems. I remember one of my first calls, the fellow said, well, yes, we know about these things, because Frank Harold was the one I replaced. The airline put so much pressure on the FAA because of what he was doing, the same thing I was doing, so they shanghaied him to Puerto Rico. So when I arrived, it wasn't long before the airline, even though I was being very diplomatic, and I'm an ex-airline pilot, I was very sympathetic, but they just said, listen, Rod, we'll get rid of you like we got rid of Harold. And, you know, that doesn't ring too well when you have all of these people being killed due to these problems. But let me go back to that one crash that I briefly went over, Salt Lake City. After I made these reports on these problems, here comes Captain Kmeyer into Salt Lake City after I had reported his high sink rate problems. And it was uncorrected, so this time he wasn't so lucky. He hit the runway hard, the landing gear ripped off, they slid a half a mile down the runway, the fuel lines broke open, fuel was being poured out. The flight engineer did not shut off the fuel booster pumps and the fuel valves, so now we had a good fire going. But everybody was still alive, and they probably could have got out if there was good evacuation. But remember, they weren't performing the evacuation as required. So 43 people lost their lives there. Now the NTSB had to come in and investigate that and cover up for their own cover-up of the problems. So that was the start of years of cover-ups by the NTSB, and people should keep that in mind when they consider TWA Flight 800, where there's a lot of evidence of a missile, and TWA corrects, and the NTSB is trying to blame it on a fuel tank problem for which there's no evidence of. Anyhow, now after this hearing, I had evidence of perjury. There was a 4,000-page transcript of the hearing. So I reported it to the FBI and the U.S. attorneys, and that was the start of learning about the cover-ups by the Justice Department. So I tried to circumvent them. I managed to get to a federal grand jury in Denver, and I quickly found out how the Wall Street Journal will frequently referred to a grand jury as a body that would indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutor requested it. Well, in the same token, they will not prosecute in most cases unless they're a more sophisticated group, which they usually aren't. Oh, anyhow, seeing that I was getting nowhere, I finally figured, well, I'm not going to work under these conditions. Fortunately, I had a lot of real estate. I remember there was someone, Bill Nickerson, who wrote the book 1,000 to 1,000,000 in Real Estate. So I was duplicating what he was doing while I was still flying for the airlines. So I had accumulated a lot of real estate. So I figured, well, I'll go back to that. So I left the FAA, but the crashes continued. And of course, with the planes getting bigger, we kill more people at a given time. So I thought, well, let's see, I got to do something here. And my activities from that point on were funded by my real estate investments. So the first thing I did, I published the first of 3 editions of Unfriendly Skies. That came out just within a few days of PSA going down in San Diego, which incidentally, there's another big scandal behind that particular crash, which I write about in my book. And I'm getting on radio shows. I to date, I've been on over 3,000 radio and television shows in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. I was even on September 11th, I was even on Turkish TV by phone, but anyhow, I don't know if anybody understood me, but anyhow. I'm getting fairly well known in the process. Oh, and during the process, somebody comes to me with some information on PSA. Those of you who may have forgotten PSA, that's the plane that went down in San Diego in 1978, and that took the record away from the New York City crash, the United DC-8. So anyhow, I found out that a number of things about that. There was a passenger on that flight that got off in Los Angeles, and before she got off, she got quite a bit of information. And this information helped to explain why the crew performed so badly. So anyhow, she tried to report it to the NTSB, and they didn't want to listen to her. So I got a statement from her. Then I demanded of the NTSB that they reopen the hearing based upon the evidence that I had, which they had, but they sequestered. Well, they refused to do it, so I filed a federal action in the U.S. District Court against them. And well, since I'm in that area, federal statutes that any of you can use, and it's one of the best ways to do something about the corruption in government. I may have been the only one that's used one of these, but let me tell you what they are. One statute is a crime reporting statute. That's Title 18 U.S.C. Section 4. If you have information about federal crime, you are guilty of a crime if you don't promptly report it to, and it says very clearly, to a federal judge or the federal officer. Well, since I had evidence of a federal crime, and which greatly increased over the years, I thought, well, that's a good reason to file the first action, which I filed, was against the FAA. The other basis for that, for filing, is Title 28 U.S.C. Section 1361, which gives any of you the right to file a federal action seeking a court order to require a federal official, a government official, to perform a duty, his duty, and to halt any unlawful conduct. So the first action was against the FAA on the crime reporting statute and also 1361. Well, remember, I think it was Judge Snarky in the U.S. District Court in San Francisco that got that one, and the Justice Department jumped right in and moved to dismiss my action, which on a alleged lack of standing. Well, I don't need any standing to report criminal activities. But at any rate, then I went to the Court of Appeals, and they sympathized with me, and they said, well, Mr. Stich, these are serious charges. Well, they got a lot more serious over the years, but this is up to Congress. I said, I know that, it is, but it's also up to the court, because these two statutes are very plainly worded. Well, of course, we were talking now about a major worldwide aviation scandal. This is what we had on our hands. So apparently the thinking was, well, let's cover up for this, and this guy will go away. I wish I had, but at any rate, and then I went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I've been there a number of times. And all this, you can find these on court record, but the justices of the U.S. Supreme Court also have a responsibility under that crime reporting skies. But they refused to hear the case. So then what I did, I came out with the next edition of Unfriendly Skies, which named the judges, named some of the yes, but that's not so good, because then they come after you, and I'll go into that in a minute, and it's very serious, believe me. I laughed, but it wasn't a laughing matter for quite a few years. At any rate, I named the federal judges, and including the justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, and also some of the things that they were covering up and some of the crashes resulting from this. Well, several of the talk show hosts I had been on after that said, "Aren't you afraid of what they may do to you?" Well, I knew I was sidestepping what they were saying. They're talking about physical harm. But I said, well, as long as they can't get to my money, I'm okay, because it takes money to do these stupid things. And I figured, well, how can he get to my money? Everything I do is legal. I have a lot of real estate. Well, there was a CIA front law firm. I found out from two sources later on, and that was Friedman, Sloan, and Ross in San Francisco, also a member of the ACLU. And so they filed a sham lawsuit against me that was barred, and this was in the California courts, that was barred by let's see, it's over 36 California statutes and rules of court, barred by federal statutes, U.S. Supreme Court decisions, and constitutional protection. And also, the way it was filed, the California judge lacked personal and subject matter jurisdiction, very clearly stated in the statute. But all that, as previous speakers have mentioned, they ignore all that. So for 5-6 years, they are rendering orders which causing me to lose valuable property. Well, there's federal remedies for this. There's two federal remedies. One is the Civil Rights Act, and there were lots of civil rights violations. And then also the Declaratory Judgment Act, which the lawsuit that was filed against me had been decided 22 years earlier, and adjudicated all issues between the parties, and that judgment was entered as a local judgment in 5 different states, including Oklahoma, Texas, Nevada, and California. Well, all this was ignored. So I go to the federal court, and I start getting the same treatment. They refuse to act. Well, over a period of years, I'm still fighting, and this started in 1982, and I'm still, and it's in an uninterrupted legal battle. Right now, I have a federal lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court in Reno, Nevada. I'm naming a group of federal judges and California judges. But it's a lot more serious than you realize, and I'll go into that. So, so what happened then, so they dismissed, they would never let me have my day in court on these things. Well, apparently there's some high force in government that first got the CIA front law firm to come after me, and then they have control of the California courts and then the federal courts. Now, I know that sounds bizarre, but if you read the books, and also read, one of the best websites I have is defraudingamerica.com. The second one is unfriendlyskies.com. But defraudingamerica.com has a lot of legal stuff, copies of legal briefs and the fights we have. And so anyhow, they dismissed it. So over a period of years, while we're fighting this out, other government agents are coming to me. These are agents of the FBI, DEA, Customs, Secret Service, former drug smugglers, CIA, and when I say CIA, this would include former heads of secret CIA airlines, secret CIA financial operations. Now, all this is described in my books, incidentally. So they're furnishing me data. So I remember 1986, I'm getting, this is about the time when October Surprise was surfacing again. And October Surprise is really more serious than people realize what this was. This is people, and this involves the seizure by Iranian terrorists of 52 American hostages that were held in Iran. And during the last days of President Carter's administration, it was felt that maybe they would be released before the election. And if so, they thought Carter would be re-elected. So and I'm getting this information, incidentally, from people who were part of the October surprise scheme. And so money was paid by, and people from both political parties were involved in this. They wanted Carter out, and especially the CIA. So they're paying money to the terrorists in Iran to delay the release of the American hostages. So here we have people from both political parties paying terrorists for their political gains, and that's kind of serious, I kind of feel. At any rate, so when this surfaced again in 1986, and this fellow who was a CIA operative, he was giving me a lot of information. And so I figured, well, I'll report this to a federal court under, remember, 18 U.S.C. Section 4. Well, this was the start of some pretty heavy stuff. So first of all, the judge refused to receive it. At first, he said, well, this is very serious. Mr. Stich, you should have a lawyer on. And I said, well, anyhow, that wouldn't work. So anyhow, then about a week later, all of a sudden he changes his mind. He's dismissing the action. But he's also doing one other thing. Now remember, this is a country of rule of law, and what I forget what else they say, but they issued orders that still exist today, and right now there's been about 5 judges that issued these orders. I am forever barred for the remainder of my life from filing any papers in federal court. Now that terminates that, and this is documented. This isn't just me rambling on. This is all documented. Now you say, how can they do that? Well, just like lawyers told me for over a period throughout the 20 years, they can't do this to you. I say, I know it, but they're doing it, and nobody's objecting. So, at any rate, so they refuse to receive the evidence, and here I'm stuck with with orders that terminate for me my legal rights, protections, and defenses. And this also bars me from defending against this sham CIA front law firm where the only remedy is in federal court. So they had me pretty well locked in there. So, okay, and I also went all the way up to the Supreme Court on that too, and the same response. So then sometime later, I'm getting information on CIA drug smuggling. And again, remember, I'm talking to the people that are smuggling the drugs. That's the CIA, DEA, I'm talking to FBI agents who tell me about their reports and what happens to them when they make the reports. So I think, well, I'll report this also. And in other words, I'm demanding of the court that he receives, and he's got to receive this under his ministerial duties, not under his judicial decision-making duties. And this is required by the federal criminal statute. They put you or I, or they put people in prison. Like I remember this one little black gal, she had an infant daughter. They sent her to 5 years in federal prison because she overheard one side of a telephone conversation discussing drugs, and she did not run off and immediately report it. So that's under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 4. She gets 5 years in prison. But the federal judges who are covering up for matters that are criminal, affecting national interest, and probably subversive at the same time, nothing's done to them, of course. So anyhow, when I filed this second action, now we got the Justice Department steps in, and this happened in Sacramento, incidentally. Justice Department, I forget who the U.S. attorney was, but they promoted him after that, I remember. But let's see. So he charges me with criminal contempt of court. Now, why am I charged with criminal contempt of court? Because I filed papers in the federal courts when I'm barred for the rest of my life, which is still in effect now. Matter of fact, the Court of Appeals also did the same thing in 1994. I'm barred from even filing papers in the appellate court. Now this is quite a system, folks. I mean, you've got to realize what is being done here, because these are serious matters. You know, we all complain about local judicial misconduct, but this is judicial misconduct on a national level that affects national issues, and I'll show you in a little bit how it affects September 11th. So this I feel, if we would use this material that's documented, you can really go after these federal judges. But anyhow, so I'm charged with criminal contempt of court, so I'm denied a jury trial. At first, they wanted to deny me bail. I'm a threat to society, and that was a U.S. attorney. And then they were requesting 2.5 years. At that time, I think I was 67. I had just had 6 bypasses, so I guess they figured they'd really eliminate me for good. But at any rate, no jury trial, so naturally they find me guilty. And I'm not going to go into what happened thereafter, but it's not very nice. While they had new accommodations for me, they started seizing my assets. And the assets were seized without any hearing, without a notice of a hearing, without cause. And that's also one of the things I'm trying to fight in federal court now. But, okay, so here we are. From 1986 to 1995, that's a period of about 9 years. I'm constantly under criminal contempt of court charges for doing the most basic thing that we all have a right to do, and also responsibility, and that's reporting criminal activities, which also by this time includes the federal judges and the Justice Department. But okay, so let me go into what's in the book to give you a little idea, and then let me hit the what I feel is a lot more judicial misconduct. Okay, Unfriendly Skies. What that does, there's no book like this. It's an insider's view, and this insider was the one who was involved in the biggest aviation scandal we've ever had in the United States or anywhere, and that occurred many years ago, but the culture is still there. I'm hearing from FAA personnel, and they tell me about what's going on, and it hasn't changed any. But I go into how I became an independent prosecutor, the NTSB involvement, the cover-up by members of Congress. Remember, there was only one member of Congress that ever was of any help. At that time, there was a senator, and I forget his name offhand, from Oklahoma, and he was he was the chairman of the Aviation Committee. He wrote me many letters about the concern about these things, but they don't do anything. And so Robert Kennedy, when he was senator in New York and running for the presidency, I brought it to his attention because one of the main crashes that was the one that happened in New York City. So he said as soon as he gets back from a trip, he was going to look into it. Well, that trip was down here to Los Angeles, so he never did make it back. And and then I go into the attempts, and I go into very specifics about the corruption going on in the California courts, because there are 6 years of hardcore civil rights violations. I go into the details of how that worked, and all the cover-ups I ran into, and Defrauding America, which is in the 3rd edition. Now that gives you years and years and years of all types of corrupt activities that affects the American people. And again, this is what I get. It's very specific. It's based on documentation and conversations with people for the last 15 years. So, like for instance, one of the individuals was the head of a major CIA operation based in Honolulu. And that had worldwide attention in 1985 when the cover was blown. Well, he's turned over all the boxes to me of CIA documents. He's describing to me the drug smuggling that was going on. One thing, when he turned boxes over to me, I don't know if he knew he had some personal information in there. And there's a list of 6 well-known politicians today that was in it. And this list was the politicians who had secret bank accounts funded by by his CIA operation, and also the code name. I won't go into that, but it's in the book, and it's kind of interesting. Now that book also has reference to 2 major air disasters, and the reason I put it in that book, I got the information from CIA sources. Pan Am 103, the bombing over Lockerbie. Everybody, or the government, blames Libya, but Libya wasn't the one that had a reason for doing it, and they're not the ones who did it. The reason for bombing TWA, putting the bomb on Pan Am 103 was the United States shot down an Iranian airliner, killing 290 people. And so they were a little irate about it. And so they paid, based upon all the information I have, a terrorist group in Syria to retaliate. And this group either already knew or they learned about a CIA drug smuggling operation using Pan Am aircraft out of Frankfurt. So it was relatively easy to get to the Turkish baggage handlers to substitute or add another bag to the plane, and that had the bomb on board. So of course, the plane blows up over Lockerbie, and so two individuals comes forward to provide information about what actually happened. Well, when you do that, you got the Justice Department after you. So both of them were falsely charged with criminal offenses. One was a former Mossad agent who has a large international investigative firm in but anyhow, the Justice Department charged him with a criminal offense to silence and discredit him. Oh, the reason he got into this act, the insurance company for Pan Am, they wanted to know, how did the bomb get put on board the aircraft? So he investigates, and he has his sources, and he comes up with what I had just mentioned about this CIA DEA drug pipeline. So fortunately, in his case, the jurors didn't believe everything that the prosecutors said, and it took him about 2 hours to acquit him. Another fellow was the undercover agent for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he was in Nicosia, where the drug operation originated. And he was in the DEA office. Anyhow, he makes an affidavit, and they come after him and charged him with criminal offenses. So then on TWA Flight 800, I go into that. There's letters on my website and in the book where about 8 months before TWA 800 goes down, I'm warning 25 members of Congress of impending surface-to-air missile attacks, and one step to take to prevent it. And the way that came about, here in Los Angeles, there were some meetings going on. General Dostum, that's a Afghan warlord that's in the newspapers now, but this was 1995. There were meetings held here in Los Angeles, and one of my CIA sources was part of it, and Dostum offered to give from 3 dozen to 100 surface-to-air missiles to the United States at no charge. Now these are missiles that terrorists in Afghan and other Middle East countries were trying to get. Dostum offered it to the United States at no charge. So there were meetings held there was CIA and FBI personnel here in Long Beach is where it was going on. And the missiles were rejected. And now, not only do you reject the missiles, and these missiles are being used in Africa. Missiles have been used in Africa for years, shooting down airliners. But here we also gave up the opportunity to work with someone inside Afghanistan. Well, 25 letters I sent out. It was 3-page, carefully worded, very detailed letters suggesting strongly that the recipients contact me and my CIA source to prevent these missiles getting into the hands of the terrorists. Well, no, this is pretty serious. So you'd think I would get some response, especially with my background, and here we have the head of a former CIA operation, and would you believe not a single one responded? But that's been what I found over the years. Now, years ago I used to request their assistance. I don't do that now. I put them on notice. It's a certified letter. Here's the information, the evidence I have. Here's the role it played in the past. Here's what may happen in the future. I'm putting you on notice. And most of those letters I put up on the internet site. So it's good reading if you go to that internet site sometime. But you get no response. Now, I remember one of my sources was, he was a former special ops individual, and he had his own counterterrorism unit that was teaching Russian and Lithuanian government agents about counterterrorism measures. Well, while he's over there, he's learning about suitcase nuclear bombs being smuggled out of Russia through Lithuania. Well, he's trying to report this to the Department of Defense, and so the Justice Department comes after him and files false charges. I forget what the charges were again, but nevertheless, he ended up in prison, so he's turned over a lot of this documentation to me. Then he also describes how he gave a lot of the Russian documents, secret documents disclosing the suitcase nuclear bomb. He gives documents to NBC, 60 Minutes, Connie Chung program and all, and how they just covered up for it all. And I feel the media is deeply involved in a lot of this because they know about it. Just like the drug trafficking, a number of my sources have testified to members of Congress behind closed doors about their role in the drug smuggling. I remember, and there's transcripts in in the book of one of these of the testimony given by this CIA covert agent, and he's describing the Gotti crime family coming down to Arkansas, getting the drugs from the CIA, how they fly the drugs out, and then this fellow is giving detailed information on how the CIA, including himself, was laundering the drug money for the Gotti crime family, and he mentions the names of the banks and all. Now, no one ever charged him with perjury on this. This is the same fellow that the Justice Department falsely charged with perjury when he was given testimony to Congress on the October surprise. Well, this time they didn't pull the same thing on him, but Congress covered up for it also. And you know, these are crimes against the American people. And from what I've seen over the years, most people in federal prison have committed fewer crimes, if any, than most of the people in key government positions, and that certainly includes the federal judges. And you know, some of these people in federal prison, it's tragic how they get set up, and some of these people, they're there for the rest of their lives. And unless help comes from somewhere, their lives are over. I remember one airline pilot, he wants to commit suicide, and I say, look, let me go into, before I get out of defrauding America, I go into the killing and mysterious deaths of people who know too much. Matter of fact, two of the people I was working closely with, they suffered the same fate. I remember up in San Francisco, there's Dexter Jacobson, this lawyer who was discovering a lot of the corruption in the bankruptcy courts. He was trying to do something about it. He was not your typical attorney. And so he and I told him what I was coming up with, and he was telling me what he was coming up with. Well, anyhow, he got a meeting set up with the FBI in San Francisco for a Monday morning, and the night before he's murdered, all of his documents from his office disappears, and another fellow I was in frequent touch with was a lawyer by the name of Paul Wiltshire. He's also not a typical lawyer, because typical lawyers, they don't give, they join the crowd. They definitely will not fight government. Because I've had lawyers in the very beginning say, look, if I defend you, that's the end of my career. And this was in the early stages. And then I go into the CIA involvement in the savings and loans, and how they were looting it. And this is, again, from this one fellow particular. He had several savings and loans that were CIA fronts, and he goes into details over the years and even provides me with documentation on how this is done, and it's really very interesting. It's quite an education, and when you know about all this, you have a little difficulty comprehending when Bush says the reason they hate us is because we're so good. And believe me, it's really it's hard to comprehend that. And so, okay. Drugging America. Now, drugging America, of course, involves drugs, but it goes into how easy it is and how people are being, thank you, people are being set up, and how like any one of you here, I'm sure, can be easily set up using the tactics that they use. I know I could have been set up myself. Well, I better not go into that, but at any rate, it shows how government agents, government informants will lie, and how they're expected to lie, and how Justice Department prosecutors even reward them for lying. I remember one matter of fact, this is kind of interesting. Jimmy Elliott, he was in the drug business with one of my close contacts, and one of the things he did with Pablo Escobar is arrange to put a bomb on an Avianca airline, and it killed over 100 people. And so he admitted that even in court at a later date when he was arrested on some other charge. But anyhow, the Justice Department arranged to get him released, arranged to have him retain quite a few millions of dollars that he had if he would testify against this other source. This other source was on a drug sting operation for agents in Beaumont, Texas. And anyhow, the Justice Department came after that fellow, and of course, the fellow that gave him verbal authorization, go ahead and carry the drugs, doesn't know anything about it now. So this is another one of my contacts that's in prison for the remainder of his life. And these are people I'm trying to help. And since my time's getting short, I do want to emphasize that there's a lot of material here to show the judicial corruption. I'm talking about hardcore corruption that affects national issues, and this is what you're going to have to focus on if you do anything. Otherwise, I think you're going to pretty well just educate a little group, but you'll never get anywhere because the system is so powerful. If you go after any one of them, you're going to get attacked by the rest of the system because the Congress is deeply involved. They're very deeply involved in this because I've got letters showing their involvement. I've got government records showing their cover-up. You've got the Justice Department involved. The CIA, you've got corruption in the bankruptcy courts you wouldn't believe. And so if you go after any particular one of these, you're going to get blindsided by one of the others. And like one of the previous speakers said, you can use the legal system, but they're going to thumb their nose at it. And this is what I have found. But right now, on this one action I have going, it's now going up for appeal. And they've already, on one of my appeals, refused to accept it because I've been barred from the appellate court. But what I'm doing, all of these things are going up on the internet. And if enough people will only use the material, then we can do something about it. But if you don't use the material, it's going to be pretty much preaching to the choir. Well, even that's okay, because back in 1978, when I first started getting on radio shows, so many people thought, oh, government wouldn't do anything like this. And that was, well, that was pretty mild in those days. We were just killing a bunch of people in aircraft. But now, there's so much corruption. It's very hard to comprehend. Even I had difficulty, but it comes to me gradually by people that I'm talking to for years, and then I get people giving me confirming certain things, like Operation Tailwind. If you remember, that's where we were assassinating POWs. Well, I had documents which are in the book that came out long before that CNN story, and I had one individual that was part of it. And I remember this one CIA fellow who tried to justify it, and I certainly didn't agree with him. But so I think that's basically it. I'm running out of time now. Oh, that's right. Okay. Thank you. 9/11. 40 years ago, we were saying how to stop terrorist hijacking. Anyway, and you didn't need anything more than a second-grade education. The ground support measures, they're secondary. The first thing to do is so obvious: secure cargo doors, no keys in the flight department. I've been an airline captain for many years. It was obvious to me what had to be done. But the FAA, because of all the corruption, that they're not doing anything on the hardcore violations, so they're not going to worry about collateral damage like safety problems. And again, as I said earlier, hijacking is only one of the problems, but right now you've got the same culture, the same people in control as before, and some of the dumb things they're coming up with is, one, let's see, we're going to shoot down airliners that maybe have 300 or 400 people on, men, women, children on board, if we think it's being hijacked, and maybe it is. And maybe it's going to go into a building. Oh, maybe it might. But you're going to kill 300 or 400 people. And then Bush also said, well, now we're going to fund a program. We're going to convert this complex aircraft system into where the pilots lose control of the aircraft, and someone on the ground will take it over. And this is the type of stuff you're coming up with. And then this hysteria of evacuating terminals for every little thing. I foresee very difficult times ahead, and thank you.
Rodney has a story to tell, doesn't he? That's why when I first heard about him, I said, I got to have this guy at our next rally. But I got to tell you something, you know, as scary as his story personally might be, you got to remember something to put it in perspective. He was a courageous guy from inside the government who went out and relentlessly went after them, okay? You know, and that's why the courts completely blocked him. However, to them, you are not Rodney Stich. Okay, to them, you are an ant. Remember movie Ants? They're not going to put that much focus and energy on each one of you. Nowhere like him. There's very few Rodney Stiches out there, okay? So don't get disheartened that just because if he ran to complete block of the courts, that you cannot use courts at all, okay? It doesn't work that way. Look at Paul Ballmer. He won over $300,000 from the California Franchise Tax Board. Look at the Winds of Free Enterprise Society, okay? Because it's a whole different perspective and game. He was going too much to the heart of the criminality of the system. Whereas for you, it's just a matter of them leaving you alone. You get the picture? Okay? So, and there is power in us coming together. That's why I keep saying you got to work and support each other in our numbers together type of thing, okay? So keep that in mind. We are running half hour behind, so just let you know, we're going to go half hour later. The program will end half hour later. I think we'd rather go half hour later than end the program, cut anybody short. Is that, everybody can agree with that? I apologize to some of you that, you know, I have to leave at 5 type of thing, but, you know, I just want to give you the best that we can, so we're going a little bit over time. So basically, we're half hour behind instead of lunch. It's lunchtime right now. Let's come back at 2:30 in our seats ready to get going.